Now on to our next panel, where we are going to be joined by our moderator, Kirsten Trusco. The title of this is Diversity and Inclusion, and I'm really excited about the amazing ladies that are here on this panel. This is the type of ratio I love to see, and I'm really excited as well that my good friend Kevin Morgan gets to be surrounded by all of these wonderful women. Just a bit of a note, Kevin actually created this panel, so this was all by his design.
Kevin. Thank you, Janine. We truly have a panel of rock stars. It's an honor to be up here. What you're going to hear today, and if you stay for cocktails and visit, is tools and methods to drive meaningful innovation in diversity and inclusion. And you hear so much out there as a check the box kind of thing, but we'll hear from these folks the benefit to the bottom line, the benefit to society. It's incredible. So I've asked each one to just do a 60-second introduction, and then we're going to have each of them give an example in real life, either of something that's gone well or poorly, and then we have some questions. So, thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Kia Scipio, and I am the Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Fish & Richardson, which is an intellectual property law firm. So as a previous speaker was talking about IP and patent and all of that, I was like, oh, we might be part of the reason why some things aren't moving along as quickly as they should. I think that, working in the legal industry is really interesting in terms of diversity and inclusion, just because it is an industry that is sort of slow to change and is built on precedent. And so now with sort of the way the workforce looks now, which is certainly very diverse, it's not sort of keeping within precedent of what the law has typically been. And so I think there are a lot of really interesting things that have come about given these changes. And I think that, just throwing out one, for example, it's the Diversity Lab, which is run by Karen Ulrich Stacy, excuse me. They launched, piloted this year, a program called the Mansfield Rule, which is very sort of a take from the Rooney Rule for those of you who are football fans, where when thinking about leadership positions, promotions, different opportunities, sort of to be decision makers in law firms and in legal capacities within corporations, 30% of the candidate pool has to be women or people of color. And I think, I'm fortunate that I work at a law firm that was one of 44 that signed on for this initial pilot. And I think innovative ideas and initiatives like that are some of the things that will help stem change in an industry that has been sort of slow to change.
Elizabeth.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Lindsay. I run a nonprofit organization based here in DC. We're called Bite Back. It's spelled B-Y-T-E back. And we train unemployed and underemployed adults in technology, and we help them move into living wage careers that use technology. We work with about 700 individuals a year who live in very diverse communities throughout the DC region. And we help them not only learn how to use computers, but we help them to really navigate applying for a job for the first time and help them to get IT certifications so that they can move into jobs like IT help desk specialist or computer support specialist or other computer-based careers as well. I think for me, one of the things I'm very passionate about is I'd like everyone in this room to walk away from this session thinking more broadly about diversity. When we say diversity, I think often we think we want to bring in more women and more people of color, period. If we're looking at the tech sector, I think that usually means we go and recruit from top tier universities, recruit diverse candidates, which of course is extremely important. But there are so many other people who bring incredible diverse perspectives. For example, people who are in their 40s and 50s, who are changing careers because of changing technology or who've never had a white collar career. There are people who didn't go to college who really have such incredible life experiences and such incredible perspectives to bring to the work and to the places where we work. So that is what I'd love for us to dig in a little bit on today.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Janice Omedeki, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Mentor Method. As the CEO and founder, I believe that tokenism should stay with blockchain, now that we know that that's it should definitely stay there.
Awesome.
But instead, our focus is using mentorship to bridge the gap between qualified, diverse talent and companies that want to hire more inclusively. So we have an algorithm that helps reduce implicit bias. There's 4 months of professional soft skills development, and at the end of that 4-month time frame, those diverse candidates are now welcomed into a company where they feel welcomed, included, and really trained to a level to be a top performer from day one. I'm excited to just discuss diversity and inclusion, especially getting into inclusion, because I think that oftentimes we think of diversity and we're like, okay, we've done enough. We get what that means, like we're good. But inclusion is equally as important, and I strongly disagree with the thought that they are binary. So excited to dig into that further.
And I am Kevin Morgan. I'm the Director of Tech Sector Attraction and Retention at the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership, which is just 3 blocks due south from here. We're essentially the marketing arm of the D.C. government for business attraction and retention. So it's not an actual government agency, it's a public-private partnership. And so I work with all of our tech executives and founders, and actually this morning I hosted a 2-hour roundtable with investors. DC has proposed an inclusive innovation fund, which is $10 to $20 million that will be focused on investments in high-growth startups from traditionally underrepresented groups in tech. And it was a fantastic and awesome conversation. And then the 2 other, I guess, Janice and Elizabeth, and Kia, you're welcome to participate as well. We had the Pathways, we started the Pathways Scholarship Program, which is focused on helping people that are completely unemployed or underemployed get basic tech training through Byteback's program, and then more advanced tech training through Thinkful was our partner. Amazon was part of this, Google, and then also had hiring partners. So kind of the takeaway, something I think is important, and as I had the conversation today, was brought to light, that discussions, for me, discussions about diversity and inclusion are teaching moments. This is an opportunity where it's that safe space to have these conversations. And as the token white male up here, which actually I think is kind of funny, but it's also, I think, goes to the point, is that a lot of times in these conversations, there are implicit biases and implicit assumptions that aren't necessarily nefarious in intent, but are just either from our backgrounds or things like that. And so I have learned, and what I think is important for me is to always come at these conversations to make the assumption that everybody's doing the best that they can, using the language and experience they have, and that these forums are very much a teaching and learning and engaging conversation. And that's what I think the value is of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've introduced myself. I've been up there an awful lot. In addition to co-chairing the events committee, I get to serve on the IOIP board, and in the last couple of years, we have greatly increased diversity, inclusion, women on the board. So it's a fabulous journey. My paid work is management consulting in fintech and banking, and a personal passion and a firm passion is, as one example, anti-human trafficking. So we were able to work with big data and work with banks and card companies to identify algorithms that have an 85% accuracy rate. If you run the algorithm on a card portfolio, there's an 85% chance that is being used to traffic another human. And in working with law enforcement, have been able to identify, capture, and prosecute.
Wow.
So, well, thank you. You're such a good cheerleader. So our next piece here is to share an example. It can be a success or a failure, but a tool, a methodology, something that people can take back to the office, or websites, or things that we can use.
Yeah, I'll start. Sure. So I think of 2 or 3 things. Obviously, the mentor method, and I'm not just saying that because I created it, but okay, maybe a little bit, but we've done a deep dive, extensive research and development on what actually helps minority potential top performers be successful in their place of work and find other opportunities to get to the next level. And we found that mentorship was number one, but you have to go beyond the matching based on surface level parameters and do a deeper dive into who those professionals are, their goals, and make it as seamless and pain-free as possible to create a sustainable mentor relationship. Oftentimes we find that HR departments within large organizations have Peggy Sue in HR that's already overworked and probably leaving in 2 or 3 years, putting together a spreadsheet and calling that a mentorship program. I've definitely been a victim to those multiple times at Fortune 500 companies. So I think the mentor method is a great way to seamlessly integrate mentorship in your learning and development and workforce development. And we're seeing real results. My favorite use case is Mia. So she came to the mentor method. She had studied graphic design at General Assembly, and she was having a hard time finding work because oftentimes employers want that 4-year degree. So despite having grit, a strong work ethic, high technical marks, she was always getting rejection emails. So 2 months into joining the mentor method, she got matched to a mentor that gave her a paying graphic design internship, which at the end of the 4-month mentoring period became a full-time position. And that literally changed her entire life. She's now gone on to create her own business, and we collaborate sometimes, so over the moon proud of her. I'm also extremely proud and humbled to be a part of the Pathways program. I mean, the value that has created in these underserved professionals, it's just, every time I get to have a conversation with those that went through the mentorship piece, it's the cup of coffee I need every day, and it makes those 2:30 a.m. wake-up calls well worth it. We've seen people, so the mentor methods portion obviously is mentorship. So we matched the Pathways scholars with mentors from Google and Amazon Web Services. And in speaking to both the mentees and the mentors, it was amazing that it was just really cool to be able to see something that you've kind of slaved over for such a long time actually help people. Like the hypotheses that we had have been validated. We've seen people that are, new to America. I mean, like somebody, I don't want to give her name out, but she immigrated here to the US, was matched to a mentor that is from, middle America, and they're still in communication today, and they're meeting, and they're talking about more than workforce development now. They're talking about where are you going to live? How are you presenting yourself during interviews? The mentor is coaching her on implicit bias, like you do not say that here. All sorts of things, and it's really amazing to see that work. Or even another use case, somebody was matched to a mentor from Google, and he felt really unconfident in his ability to petition for himself and be able to have that confidence that he's worth investing in. And throughout that time period of mentorship, I saw him change from kind of hunched over, not that confident, to now making eye contact and saying, this is what I want, this is how much I think I should be making, can you help me get to these 5 things, this is what I want to do. And it's just it's amazing to see that evolution. So thank you for including us in that.
Janice, that is fabulous. Are there tools? You've mentioned a number of different programs.
Yeah.
Would you suggest that we go to the websites? Are there books?
Absolutely. So thementormethod.com, the Pathways, what is the website for that?
It will be Pathways Scholarship. We're getting that put up in
Great.
the next few weeks to have that
Yep.
set up. Yep.
Janice, did you say you wake up at 2:30 in the morning?
Intentionally.
Sometimes it happens. Welcome to Startup.
I think Janice really perfectly articulated so many ways that partnerships are really key.
Yeah.
I think that each of us on this panel, we bring a different component to diversity and inclusion, and I think Pathway Scholarship is so innovative because we're working together and we're training folks from the beginning. We're providing them with a mentorship opportunity. We're linking them with employers. I know many folks in this room represent employers, and I think I would like to say that we're out there. There are members of your communities, members of the startup world, nonprofits, other diversity and inclusion professionals we can really work together. Because especially when we're talking about working with underserved communities, and we're really committed to diversifying where we work in ways that are deeper than just a surface level, our folks really need multiple supports. So we have many students at Bite Back who face incredible challenges. One of my favorite students was a man who was he was homeless. Many of our students are homeless or living on a couch, a friend's couch, living in a car. We had a student last year who was living in a storage unit, and he would come to Bite Back. He would have to be there by like 6 or 7 in the morning because he had to be out of the storage unit. And he came and he studied and he moved his way up into a certification program, and he's now working in IT at a nonprofit. And that wouldn't have happened without the support of the mentor method, without the support of us working with DC government, and without us really providing a wide array of services. And so I think, it's not necessarily a sexy tech tool, but I think there's such value in partnerships. It takes more than one of us to really make a difference.
So Elizabeth, for the people who are in the audience but not from DC, are there other networks, other organizations like yours you could kind of point them to, or some central area to say, okay, I'm in New York?
Yeah, so there are digital inclusion nonprofits across the country. There are a number of organizations that train folks in IT. There's a wonderful organization called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm on the board. And if you check out their website, there's a list of over 300 affiliates from across the country of organizations that do similar work to what we do.
Very cool. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no, I think a couple of points that have been made that I kind of wanted to just sort of, fine tune in that. I think it's really important to recognize that diversity has so many different aspects, and that the word and the matter in and of itself just has so many different facets. One of the things that I oftentimes, people sort of seem to think. And again, sort of to your point in terms of people being open and realizing that there's more, inclusion is a significant and very important complement to diversity. I've heard it described before as diversity is everybody getting invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And so that's just sort of a way to look at it. And so from sort of the law firm side, where you have people who have the credentials, they've gone to law schools, they've gone to some of the best law schools, they've done very well academically, and they've found themselves in a situation where, for all intents and purposes, they've sort of made it, right? But then they're faced with the same sort of implicit biases that the other panelists have talked about, and they're not people that are necessarily living in a storage unit or somebody who is homeless. These are folks who are educated and presumably have all the tools they need in order to succeed, but implicit bias and other issues of prejudice are preventing that. And so I think, I mentioned, partnerships are something that you guys talked about before, and collaboration is key. And one of the things that I think a couple of things that I think have been pretty successful, two things. I mentioned the Mansfield Rule before, which sort of outlines, I think it's really important to have metrics. If you're saying we want to make sure that we are as diverse and inclusive a culture, wherever that may be, as possible, you have to have some metrics by which you discern that. So that you can go back, 6, 9, 12 months later and see, have we accomplished the things that we set out? That being said, it's also really important and I think makes efforts toward diversity and inclusion much more successful when there's a strategic plan. Mm-hmm. What is the basis for wanting to be diverse and inclusive? What does diversity and inclusion look like for your organization or your company? And again, so that you have you've outlined your goals and priorities, and 2, you have specific metrics by which you are basing whether or not you've been successful, and not to say oh, we're diverse and inclusive, we're done, but recognizing that you have, you have some milestones that you want to make sure that you're meeting. And so for me and the work that I'm doing, I think success is being a part of collaborations with organizations that are focused on ensuring that we're creating a diverse or maintaining a diverse and inclusive work environment. And then also, like my firm took its own initiative in creating a strategic plan and outlined 6 priorities that they have for that plan. And it's inclusive of not just the attorneys, but also the entire fish community. So that's our legal staff, that's our administrative staff, that's the attorneys, it's everyone. And I think, to me, those are 2 sort of successful ways of implementing D&I.
Well, and your firm too is one of them, having worked in Fortune 100 for years, a very big firm that is supporting transgender.
Correct.
And some of the most senior partners litigating some of the biggest are welcome.
Yes, absolutely.
So a question then, if we've got people in the audience that say, okay, metrics and strategic plan and roadmap, could you point us to templates, tools, where are things that we could pull off the shelf just to get started?
Yeah, I mentioned Diversity Lab, and while they've worked a lot with law firms, they work with other companies as well, and have been really fantastic in sort of helping us as well as others, fine-tune and really customize how we go about, like, say, for example, the Mansfield rule. A lot of times organizations, leadership is something that is, you get elected, right? Well, for our firm, for example, the leadership positions are appointed positions by the firm president. So of course we had to customize our application of the Mansfield rule a little bit to recognize the way our firm functions. And so I think that's a great resource. I think another, again, this is sort of legally focused, so I apologize to those folks, but organizations like the Law Firm Leadership on Diversity Council, LCLD, I'm sure some of you may have heard of it. They're really great in terms of helping. They have several different programs that, sort of run the gamut from someone's career, from cradle to retirement, I guess I will say. And, they run a number of different mentorship programs, professional development programs for people who are a little bit more senior, so fellowship programs, all things that I think are really helpful in sort of looking at where you are and looking at where you want to go and making that a goal.
Excellent. Kevin?
So the Innovation and Technology Inclusion Council was started by the Mayor Muriel Bowser, our current mayor, and released a Pathways to Inclusion report in, I think it was November 30th, 2016. But you can go online if you just plug in Pathways to Inclusion, Washington, D.C. You'll be able to download this, and it kind of lays out at a high level what the focus is for the city and the mayor's focus. I don't speak for the mayor. This is in my work and coming across this and building DC as the capital of inclusive innovation. So Project 500 came out of this, is project500.org, and it's an incubator accelerator focused on helping what's we've called the new majority entrepreneur, underrepresented groups in tech, start 500 companies in tech or high growth fields by entrepreneurs that are from underrepresented groups. And then also some else it outlines is a focus on 5,000 new jobs for people who, again, are from underrepresented groups in tech, and lays out at a high level. And now one of the specific tactical implementations is that Inclusive Innovation Fund, which we're currently in the RFI, the request for information for that. It's a $10 to $20 million goal, seeded $1.5 million. In 2018, the budget outlay is 1.5, has been allocated by the Deputy Mayor's office, the rest to be raised by private funds, and figuring out how to build the program, the execution, and it's a great endeavor, and it's a very high level. One of the things we have in DC is just we have an opportunity for more early stage capital, and I'll just read that in the RFI, one of the things says we only have 1% of funded startup founders are African American, and only 8% are funded founders are female. So when we talk about metrics, that's actually really a big part of our 2-hour conversation this morning. About 30% of the time was focused on what do we choose and what do we not choose to include in an inclusion fund? And what I'm learning through this is we can't be all things to all people. So in certain instances, we have to make choices, and choosing one over the other doesn't necessarily mean one is better or worse. It's just given, again, within the constraints. So it's a fascinating conversation to figure out how we define inclusion. And one of the key pieces here, the adjective, is historically underrepresented groups. Or is that an adverb? But that is, I think, an important and very explicit point to make when we choose how to execute these type of funds, how we do this type of work is, again, what are the assumptions you're making? What are the trade-offs? And in this instance, in this set, we're going to move forward under these rules, these metrics, because again, that's the biggest point. In inclusion, when we talk about programs, I think it's very important to keep in mind the so what. We're going to be inclusive and diverse to what, I guess to what end is better. To what end, because we want to achieve X, Y, and Z, and having that target and being able to measure against that is really how we track the progress. Otherwise, I think we're throwing a lot of the walls just hoping something sticks. So project500.org, Pathways to Inclusion report. There's also Beacon, Veneta Project and Beacon, which are two beacons supported by the Deputy Mayor's Office, and then Veneta Project as well is focused on women entrepreneurs.
Excellent. If people weren't writing quickly enough, is that on your website? Is it on your LinkedIn?
Send her an email, she'll find it. Yeah, yeah, you can send me an email and I'll give you all that information. It's not on our website per se, it's in 4 different websites: Pathways to Inclusion Report, Project 500, Veneta Project, and Beacon.
Okay. So I'll do another plug for Social Link, which is the IOIP platform to communicate. If everybody joins, you can choose to join as an associate member, professional member, but get into Social Link and you can connect so easily with not just people here in the room, but globally. So I'm going to tee up a couple questions, and we are going to have time for questions from the audience, so if you can give some thought. What have you seen is the business value created by establishing a more inclusive environment? So it's not just a warm, fuzzy group hug. It's not just a check the box. It actually delivers ROI.
Well, you know, I think for having a more diverse and inclusive culture, you know, we work in an area of law that is innovative. We're doing intellectual property and patents. And I think it brings a breadth of ideas and just thinking that wouldn't be if it was very, you know, everybody was the same, everybody had the same background, everybody had the same experience. One of the things that I think is really great about our firm in particular is that we have a program where people who are technical specialists or patent agents are able to, if they choose, to go to law school and then return as, and continue working while they're patent agents and tech specs, and then become associates or attorneys at the firm after graduation. And I think that that's an amazing aspect of thinking that comes, or a perspective that comes to the client, right? Because you have somebody who's sort of been there from the very beginning and using their technical background and expertise, whether they have a PhD in biotech or whatever, and now they also have the approach and analytical prowess as an attorney. And so the client is getting sort of this very global scope in terms of the way that we might approach their matter. So I think, you know, it ends up being a real boon for the client to have people that have such an interesting, whether it's a educational background, you know, cultural and socioeconomic background that are coming to their cases. It's beneficial for them.
Excellent.
Well, we were talking earlier before the panel that there are multiple studies that show that companies that are led by, that have diverse boards, that have diverse leadership teams, their boards make better decisions, they have better financial returns. And when you asked that question, Kirsten, I was thinking of a couple companies that I personally don't shop at anymore. I don't shop at H&M anymore, for example, because there was a controversy with an ad, a sweatshirt that they put on a young black child. And, you know, I think throughout my social media, everyone's like, what happened? Like, clearly there were no diverse voices. it's hard to imagine with the H&M example that there was a black person in any of the rooms that approved that ad. And so, I mean, I think just basic like profit, basic selling, especially any companies that are forward facing the public, retail. I mean, I just don't think we can underestimate the importance of being inclusive and really understanding the communities that we're trying to sell things to.
I 1,000% agree, and as much as I think some of us would like warm and fuzzies to pay bills, they don't. So in speaking to our corporate clients and others, it's important to really talk about the market and their bottom line. So I love that you brought that up in terms of no warm and fuzzies. So that's how I operate. But just from a market perspective, studies have shown that 37% of minority professionals will leave a company due to a lack of inclusion. That equates to about 14 million women and people of color that are leaving an employer every year. That's a lot of people. It takes about 6 to 9 months to backfill those positions. And in that time period, per employee, companies are paying between 50 to 400% of that employee's salary. So let's say maybe here, a senior associate making $90,000, you could easily be paying, upwards of $500,000 to replace that person every year per every employee. That's a lot of money that companies are spending, that if they just focused on developing those professionals, including them in the future of the company and making sure that they were welcomed and part of the company culture, that's millions to be saved every year. And that usually opens up some eyes and some checkbooks.
I mean, my easy answer for me on that is there's 7+ billion people in the world. 99.9% don't look like me, don't think like me, don't talk like me, and don't have my experience. And if we're in the global marketplace, it's me that's missing out if I'm not being open and accepting that. It's just, to me, it's a no-brainer. That's it.
Very cool. Are there questions in the audience? Brett?
I'll
Sorry, I
talk
don't-
this way. So much to unpack here. Talking about Silicon Valley has its own problem with women. Part of that may be the whole math, computer science thing, which is now changing. But, a lot of innovation has come out of Silicon Valley, and I think most people know that the reason it has happened what kind of came out of, the whole gay rights thing and tolerance and inclusion. So the Silicon Valley Bay Area has been very good with minorities, maybe not so much with women, but, a lot of different kind of programmers and very much meritocracy for the most part. They have problems with women still, but maybe that's changing. But, I've had this opportunity to travel the world and see all the different people and how they see the world differently and all of this stuff. I actually had someone who I had a lot of respect for once upon a time say, imagine what the world would be like if not for the subjugation of women throughout history. And I think as an innovator, and I'd like your advice, all of you, as an innovation person, innovation professional, what's the advice for me as an old white guy to say, look at the resources we have with the people who might be, I want to invent a new product. If I really look at ethnography and how other people see the world and how other cultures approach things, how do I do that for someone who may not be, I think I'm fairly enlightened, but, but I want your advice because this is what you need to tell me.
Well, first off, thank you for asking the question. I think that's a great first step, and I wish we could clone you millions of times. I think, and everybody else please chime in, my perspective on that is focus less on surface level parameters and focus on the person, right? Just be a person first, the same way you would for networking or pitching a customer or something like that. You want to identify heart to heart, right? And obviously brain to brain with like the business case. So I say do that in your hiring practices, do that through mentorship, do that through every opportunity you have to sort of build your teams and you want to be at the forefront of innovation. Person first, surface level, demographics and all of that, back burner, 1,000%.
And I would echo that, and I think surrounding yourself with diverse voices and perspectives, I just think it's so essential. I think we see coming out of the big companies in Silicon Valley, I think one of the reasons we see issues and we read stories like that New York Times story, right, about how women are treated in those corporations is because there aren't significant numbers of women in leadership. There aren't significant numbers of people of color in leadership. And it truly is, I don't know what your career is, but it truly is, I think, we have to work together. And I think those of you in this room who do have the ability to hire and to promote within, to really think about who's missing in the rooms where we're sitting and what can we do to bring them in. At Bite Back, we do a lot of work with all levels of our staff to really encourage folks to come up with new ideas. We really encourage creativity from even, somebody who's like at the lowest level in the organization to bring ideas, to try new things. We really look at what are people's skills and talents and how can we help develop them. And by doing that across the organization, we're creating a pathway for people from really different backgrounds to be able to move up and to really have a say in the work that we do. And I think doing that kind of work, really thinking about professional development, really thinking about changing the rooms you're sitting in makes a huge difference.
If I may add, because I think what has been said is sort of hits the mark perfectly. I think we have to take it even to a very basic level of just how we interact with people outside of the work environment, right? I mean, it's really easy to say like, well, in my office, I'm going to make sure that when I'm putting my teams together, that I have a diverse looking team or that I have a diverse thinking team, right? But then when you walk to Starbucks and you run into somebody in Starbucks, who are you making small talk with? Mm-hmm. Is it the person who looks just like you? Is the person that reminds you of your son or daughter?
Yeah.
Or are you like, you've been standing in line, if anybody goes to the Starbucks here, that I love, because they know my drinks, but sometimes you're like, but I mobile ordered. Why am I still waiting 20 minutes? And so, there is a group of people. Who do you choose to start up the conversation with? Or who do you continue to engage? Like, because, people will engage you in conversation. So who are you continuing the conversation with? And who do you just like turn to your phone and like start scrolling through? I think it's just like a basic level of, for somebody who travels all the time, I'm somebody who travels all the time as well. And you spend a lot of time waiting. And small talk happens. And I will never forget one of my first flights in my current role. There was a gentleman who, our flight ended up being delayed for like 2 hours, and, other people were getting rebooked, but the two of us were kind of standing around because we're like, well, I'm not in an urgent rush to get where I need to go. And it turns out, we were just kind of having small talk, and I was telling him a little bit about the work that I do, and he was like, I never, would have guessed that you were a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And he thought he was complimenting me, but I was kind of like, what made you not, what made you think that? And he was like, well, and then he tried to clean it up. Well, lawyers are usually so uptight and they're so this and that and blah, 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 blah. But we all knew, the two of us knew, he never would have imagined that I'm a lawyer, because here I am, a relatively young, maybe looking, black woman. And I wasn't dressed like, I'm going to a business meeting. I wasn't dressed slovenly either, but it was casual. It was an all day, I was flying to California, didn't have meetings until the next morning, so I was in jeans, a sweater, and a jacket. And so it's just being thoughtful in that way. We talk a lot about unconscious bias, and I think people think they get a pass because, everybody has unconscious bias, ha. Now it's a matter of, well, if we recognize that unconscious bias exists, we have to consciously counter that bias. And that's in your personal life as well as your professional life.
Well, a story to add to that. So being in banking and insurance and a little bit of law enforcement with cybersecurity and fraud, I often sign things KB, not Kirsten. And so you're emailing or you're texting or what have you, and then you get to a conference, you get to the office, and they go, we thought you were a guy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar. And you have a colleague who's a good friend of mine that's transgender, and she now does similar. She signs things with her initials, and she said it's amazing when you finally get on the phone or a video chat, how immediately, she said, I can feel it, how it changes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
To add on this, what I hear in conversations is just being intentional. Is what are the intentions, setting the intentions, just being cognizant, and sometimes just simply being aware. And I think a lot of times people can feel a lot of guilt and shame once they recognize that, oh my goodness, I wasn't aware. And so again, one of the great things I like being here in DC is that there is this push and there is this awareness and there is this kind of we focus that is gaining more and more momentum, because I definitely think that we are better when we are inclusive, when it is the we. And then I'm a preacher's kid from the Bible Belt, so if anybody knows what that means, I apologize in advance. But, you know, I used to go to church, and there was this seek and ye shall find, right? It's something that we've all heard. And what I realized over time, there was a certain point where I realized where when I would encounter people, talk to people, have interactions, I would look for the differences. Like, why are we different? And I'd find it. Every single time I would find out exactly why we're different. And so as part of these conversations and being among amazing people like these panelists and you, I kind of pivoted that and realized that seek and ye shall find also means if I look for the similarities, if I look for why we're equal, if I seek why we belong together, I will find that too. And for me, when we talk about what are those little tools that we use, that's a little moment that kind of gets my intention correct and say, you know what, I am actually discounting and validating this person based on my past kind of habits. And so let me be intentional and say, you know what, I'm going to find the thing that makes us alike. And 9 times out of 10, those conversations happen. And I realize, you know what, there's this, how we define the individual groups, and there's this, where it becomes a we, and that we are human beings, and that we are essentially better together and part of a greater whole, all of us.
Are there any questions?
Thank you. Actually, what you just said brings to mind a commercial that says, we are more alike, my friend, than we are disalike. And I think that's a great one. My question for the group is around sponsorship. We've heard a lot about mentorship, which can help folks who may not have gotten into the room or invited to the dance, in the room and at the dance. But it's something else too. I think you hinted at it earlier, Kristen. Get invited to the C-suite and be in that leadership team and be in a position to really affect strategy of an organization. And I know that one thing at Booz Allen we've really done is we're very active about sponsorship in terms of aligning people with folks who might be 2 or 3 levels above them, who can not only go in and advise them, but literally pick them up and move them to an opportunity that they would not otherwise have gotten and give it to them. So my question is, have you done any investigation, or are you actively looking at any sponsorship opportunities for the folks in your programs?
Short answer is yes. I think with what we do, obviously, the focus is on mentorship, but what we're finding is that 93% of those matches a year later are still in communication, and that opens that door to sponsorship. I think that sponsorship happens when you've built that trust and rapport, and you're able to see the similarities and really have that emotional investment in that person. So I think that you definitely hit the nail on the head. Next time you should be on this panel with us. I think that's a great point to bring up. But yeah, I think that there's definitely room for sponsorship, especially in the C-suite level. What we're doing now with certain organizations is looking at women that are at the director level, and how do we get them to partner, because there's a significant drop-off at that point. And why is that, right? So now we're able to take those women in directorial roles, get them mentored by partners or those that are on the way to fast track to be partners, and then now we're testing and building case studies around what happens when that network of advocacy and sponsorship is in place. You know, do we see that there's more of an emotional connection if there's more of, those resources available, so that we don't see, out of a room of 100 directors, only 2 women are actually brought up to partner? So great question.
Any other questions?
So we,
Oh, okay.
There was one back there.
All right, so this may be slightly different. My name is Jason Brewster. I'm from University of Virginia. What about the new targets and discussion around neurodiversity? HP has said that they have a target of 1% of neurodiverse employees, including those with autism or other traditional disabilities that have precluded them from the workforce. What can you take from what you've been able to do successfully in this arena and apply it to those with neurodiverse issues?
I can jump in on that because we had a conversation about that this morning in terms of with these investors, and these were Fortune 100 high-level, C-level venture capital funds, equity funds, et cetera, and that was exactly the conversation we had. Piece of it was focused on if you're being inclusive and we're opening up to people with disabilities, then we get into an optical understanding of what is a disability, what is one group, and then when you talk about mental disabilities as well, what is the cutoff? How do you validate that, right? And so that kind of comes into when we talk about this type of inclusion and diversity, or if we're talking about funding, what are the proxies that we use to say, yes, this qualifies, or no, this doesn't? There's no clear answer on that, and there's one that we've only begun to discuss. Because again, I think a lot of times when we talk about inclusion and diversity, the LGBTQ community now is more and more than it was, 20 years ago. But so then we will need to look also at mental disabilities, mental health, and other areas. And so again, what I was alluding to when I said sometimes we have to make decisions at certain points to say this is the best definition, this is the best understanding, this is best that we can do today, here and now, with the understanding. And it's taking an agile approach to inclusion, right? We're going to take the feedback, yes, this worked well, we're going to pivot, we're going to adjust, we're going to grow and strengthen. But coming back to the very specific issue of mental issues and things like that, and I'm just saying mental issues because I think it's the easiest bucket for me to put it into. What was the word you used again?
Neurodiversity.
Diversity. If you and I were to have a conversation right now, I'm just going to flip that and give it to you. Could you give me a clear definition that would work in a government setting or in a VC setting that would say this is exactly, and this is how we validate or not invalidate, but this is how we say these are the people that need to be the focus of that? Right.
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. There's different clinical models you can choose, and those typically that have autism, the unemployment rate's about 80% or higher. And so, yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it at clinical, it's bright line. But if you want to look at it as people who need additional help, who have social struggles, things of that nature, then maybe it's not as clear. And so you could certainly take an agile approach, but the biggest difficulty is going to be that there's more cost than just including people who are neurally typical, that may just have a different skin color, different sexual orientation. When you get into neurodiversity, there's a lot of additional efforts. It's not as easy to put someone in the workforce who has autism. However, you can look at certain career choices like where there's a lot of pattern recognition or things of that nature that say an autism population would
5-second response to that,
Yeah.
and then please, is that the conversation piece came up and says, well, if you're going to include this group, do you include people with ADD? Right? Which means looking at the whole spectrum, and then the other piece, and I'm not discounting, I think it's very valid and one worth. Again, when you talk about the administrative costs of understanding how to implement and then looking at that and broadening up, it opens up a whole new not a new conversation, just adds to the complexity, and a very important point, and one that I'm sure over time and we will focus on more. Sorry.
Sounds like you two need to connect. We've been given the hook to say we've only got a minute left, but I know you have a comment.
I think that was a great question. At Bite Back, we teach a lot of individuals who have both diagnosed and undiagnosed mental health issues, learning disabilities, and we have invested in additional types of training. We help people get accommodations so that they have longer to take their test. We really provide one-on-one support. And I think it goes back to your question earlier about the ROI. I mean, I have a nephew who is autistic and who also is extremely brilliant, right? And when he's an adult, he will contribute immensely to wherever he works. And so I think if we're thinking about bringing in folks who are contributing in different ways to our companies, who are bringing a perspective that other people who are not neurodiverse, which that's the first time I ever heard that term and I love it, then I think it's worth the investment. And again, I think it also goes to partnerships, working with organizations, government agencies that are providing some of those support services that the private sector maybe isn't.
Excellent. So highlights, and then we go to break. Okay, you talked about everyday life. Outside your work, choose who you want to chat with.
I love that.
You acknowledge that legal may be a roadblock to innovation, and sometimes diversity and inclusion. The Mansfield rule, 30% candidate pool have to be female or people of color, and that doesn't have to just be in law. Others could adopt that. Diversity has many facets. Diversity is everybody being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. We must have metrics to assess success, a strategy, a roadmap. Refer to Diversity Lab for tools and methods, and law firm leadership on Diversity Council as tools. Janice, you talked about the mentor method, and it is a tool, and it is a partner, yes.
TheMentorMethod.com, we are available.
And how to seamlessly integrate mentoring and diversity and inclusion into the core HR. It needs to not just be a check the box, it needs to be part of the core. The power and partnering, longevity of relationships. You gave some examples of it's not just the immediate mentoring, it can be for years, and it's mentor to mentee and the reverse, the value that comes from that. You talked about studies, 14 million people a year, women and people of color leave their employers because of lack of diversity and inclusion, and if it costs 50% to 400% of their salary to replace, you can save millions a year, again to the ROI point. Elizabeth, you talked about power and partnering, not-for-profits, big corporations, startups, government, tools in partnering, the digital inclusion non-for-profits, look for those. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance as a tool. And that one ROI on diversity and inclusion and women on the board is higher returns and growth and speed of growth. And Kevin, you talked about Innovation and Technology Inclusion Council. Project500.org, Inclusive Innovation Fund, and what to include in that fund, and tools, and just set intentions every day. Be aware, seek and ye shall find, and look for those similarities. So there's so much to digest, so many tips and tools that we got. A reminder, this is all being taped. Members can sign into the Academy and be able to share this with others. An entirely different topic, I'm going to do a plug for John Wolverton. He's on our board. And IOIP would like your input on a SWOT analysis for the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. John is fostering that. It's in the conference room. If you can stop by, he'll tell you a little bit more about it. But the board did it yesterday. We would really like to see the input that you might have. So with that, break. Thank you.